opportunity to make another contribution on this bill. I want to make an additional point on Clause 56 of Part 1, because my colleague Ian Lees-Galloway, quite rightly, I think was the first person to speak on the effect of the payment for, or not the payment, the actual reduction in wages for undertaking a partial strike. I want to add the point, Mr Chair, that it is most frequently our emergency services that actually use this provision when they have a dispute with their employer. And there's a very good reason why it's most frequently our emergency services that use this provision when they have a dispute with their employer, because they are so reluctant to take full strike action to address any dispute that they might have with their employer. So I'll use the example of the firefighters, because people probably didn't even notice, but over the last year, our firefighters have been in a dispute with their employer. People didn't notice because fires kept getting attended to. The accidents kept getting attended to. All of those things kept happening because the firefighters didn't withdraw their labour in order to get their dispute sorted out. What they did was they took partial strike action. That is, they worked to rule. They were on duty the whole time, but they chose to not do some duties that were actually outside what they were contracted to do. So filling out some reports, sending some emails, some administrative functions that were not core to the service that we, the New Zealand public, rely on them for. Now, why I'm describing this in some detail is because without much fuss and bother, they were able to demonstrate their value to their employer and get their industrial dispute sorted out without it impacting at all on the New Zealand public. Now, what I believe Clause 56 will do, I think Ian Lees-Galloway is right about this, is it will actually mean that if employees, if the firefighters and other emergency service workers are going to be actually penalised for that, they may well say, well, let's just go the whole hog. Let's not muck around with a partial strike. Let's actually do the whole thing. And that is actually going to harm the New Zealand public if that is brought about. And certainly I sat in on some of the submissions on this bill and asked some of these unions that had used this provision, they said the reason why they used partial strike was because of the nature of the services that their union members undertook, and that they really wanted to try every other avenue first before they withdrew their labour and therefore harmed the public in that way. They said that they believed this provision would put more pressure on members of their unions to actually take much more drastic action. And I think that that is the thing that the government doesn't want to do, but I think this will be an unintended consequence of Clause 56 of Part 1 of the Employment Relations Bill. Mr Chair, I do want to talk about the 40% of the children living in poverty in this country who are in working households.
That's right.
I want to talk about them because the Prime Minister said, the Prime Minister wrote in his speech to the throne that child poverty was going to be a priority, and yet here they are in their very first act of the 51st Parliament moving to reduce wages. In those very households where those 40% of children living in poverty actually reside. And I think that they're completely going about this the wrong way, because it's those same families that are going to have this pressure on them, Mr Speaker. That when the employer says to them, no, you can't have a wage increase this year, but I tell you what, if you agree to give up your lunch break and your tea break, I might see fit to give you 0.5%. It's these families who are going to come under the pressure to actually give away their right to having a lunch break and a tea break. That will be completely legal. It will be completely legal under what the government is proposing, and yet actually they wouldn't be able to under the current law, because under the current law, yes, they could bargain for their wage increase, but they must retain the legal right to have a lunch break and a meal break. It's these very families, and that's the mechanism that's going to be used. So the pretence from the National Party that workers are going to have control over whether they're going to have a tea break and a lunch break or not. We know to be a complete nonsense. It actually belongs in the crypt where Bill Birch's idea that workers were going to have freedom of choice to keep their penal rates belongs.
Joanne Hayes.
I move that the question be now put.
Sue Williams-Seal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just begin by congratulating